கல் தோன்றி மண் தோன்றா காலத்தே முன் தோன்றிய மூத்த மொழி என் தாய்மொழி தமிழுக்கு முதற்கண் என் வணக்கங்கள். நான் பேசுற மொழி உங்களுக்கு புரியுதா? Why don't you understand this? I wonder why, but I know why. It's because I spoke in a language called Tamil. What if I were to tell you that whatever I said in those initial few seconds is absolutely crucial for the rest of this evening, and that I won't repeat it in English? How will that make you feel? Left out, maybe? Excluded? Don't worry, that's not the case. Because I really like you people. What a fantastic audience today. Give yourself an applause. But also I checked, I have no other choice. So, even if it was true, this example of linguistic exclusion is nothing in comparison to the harsher reality that many of us face. Exclusion comes in various flavors, and for a queer person like myself, being excluded, being treated differently is a fact of life. What is strange, though, is that even in the safe spaces that we queer people have created to heal ourselves, we often unintentionally exclude others. Picture this. The location is a famous bar in Manhattan that offers a sense of community for LGBTQ+ people. And one fine night, certain folks were denied entry into this establishment because of who they were, sparking the modern-day human rights movements. If you think I'm describing the 1969 Stonewall Inn rebellion, you would be half right. The location is indeed the iconic New York bar, the Stonewall Inn, but the year is not 1969. It's 2018. And this recent incident happened to a person with a visual impairment because they had a service dog. This is not an isolated incident. There are several such examples of the so-called safe queer spaces being ignorant and uninformed of the needs of the disabled community. Reading about these incidents touched a nerve from my past. You see, for a long time, almost 2 decades of my life, I had been a caregiver. I was born as the youngest child to a couple in their late 40s and grew up with an older brother who was autistic and had a learning disability. When I was 8 or 9, my mother developed a chronic illness that eventually made her bedridden. So, after my father died when I was 17, I had to take complete care of my mom while still studying, trying to find a job, and landing on my feet. And when I was not doing any of these things, I was on the streets, not playing, but watching out for my older brother who was autistic, making sure he was not getting stripped, or in the worst case scenario, getting molested by monsters. Growing up in a society in India that desexualizes people with disabilities and treats them as less than humans, I had no way to prevent what was happening to him. But just look at him. In my eyes, he was perfect, and I loved him more than anyone else in the world. I just wish others could see him the way I saw him. Despite all this, when it came to school, I was not just a bright student, but also an extremely busy one, because I took part in dance, debates, drama, and whatnot. To be honest, school was my only happy place where I could live out my dreams. But that feeling didn't last long. When I saw others' families being a part of their children's lives, I gathered my trophies and walked home alone because my spaces were not accessible for my family. From that young age, I saw how the majority in a society decide who partakes, who benefits, and who matters in that society. But just think about this. Is the real problem here my mother's or brother's disability or the society's inability? Moving on. You must have realized by my usage of past tenses so far. By the time I graduated college, my mother and brother had both passed away and had literally nothing more left to lose. So I decided to live my authentic life. I came out to my immediate family and friends, and later in 2017, I came out to the rest of the world when I competed in a national Indian pageant and finished as the runner-up for Mr. Gay World India. This unlocked many doors for me as an out and proud gay man from a conservative part of India. I was interviewed and being asked to speak and asked to be on panels. Naturally, as yet another minority group, I envisioned many of these queer spaces to be inclusive for people with disabilities and to set an ideal example of a society. But to my surprise, majority of them were not. When I discussed this with some of my friends, I heard some familiar excuses such as, "That's not a job," and the classic catch-22, "I've never seen anyone with disabilities in such events." I have a dilemma now. I've had this longing since childhood to be part of a fair society where everyone can be a part of. Should I silence those voices in my head and do what is expected of me? And then I thought to myself, what if my mother or brother were alive right now and I took them to such an event? How would I feel if they were stopped at the door and sent back because they couldn't be accommodated? And all of a sudden, I understood how important this is for me. I carry my mother in spirit wherever I go. This beautiful saree that you see was my gift to her from my first month's salary. This matters to me. But it should also matter to everyone. Ask yourself honestly, how many of you here have friends with disabilities? And if you have, with how many of them have you openly discussed about their challenges? We tend to avoid taboo topics, ones that can open a can of worms, not realizing that it is precisely those topics that can make or break our future. Doesn't this sound familiar to us, queer people? As a minority who knows what it's like to be discriminated against, why shouldn't this be part of our agenda? Why is it that I can openly discuss about diversity of sexuality and gender in queer spaces, but not that of body and mind? Isn't the essence of our community all about loving and celebrating oneself? We queer people span a huge spectrum of identities and issues. And when we ignore any portion of our community, like the 2 in every 5 trans and the 1 in every 4 lesbian, gay, bisexual people with disabilities, we have failed together as a community because we have forgotten a privilege called ableism. In fact, our needs are more similar than we ever realize. To be seen, to be respected for who we are, and to be able to live with dignity. Have you heard of the curb cut effect? If you didn't understand from my pronunciation, here's a slide. These sidewalk curb cuts or ramps were initially designed for wheelchair users, but now we use them for pushing shopping carts, strollers, skateboards, bicycles, and so on. We are able to watch Netflix shows or videos in other languages or with stronger accents, such as mine. because of subtitles, which came from the captioning movement of the 70s to make television accessible for those who are deaf or hard of hearing. And how many of you texted someone today? I hope no one is texting right now. I should be home by 6. Did you know that text messages were initially primarily designed for the deaf community? But now, we are heavily dependent on the texting culture. And WhatsApp alone is being used to send over 100 billion messages per day. That is a ginormous example of the curb cut effect, which proves that when you design for disabilities, you make things usable for everyone. So what can we all do to return the favor? Yes, all of us. Because although I've focused only on queer spaces, the measures we can carry out to make them accessible can be applied anywhere, physical or virtual, if we understand how to become allies. Before that, we must understand who is an ally. An ally is not a badge that you earn today and forget tomorrow, but rather something that you wear on your sleeves with full responsibility and speak up for when you witness oppression. I'm reminded of a powerful quote by Desmond Tutu. If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. An ally is someone who realizes that every marginalized community is resourceful, complete, and doesn't need your saving, but they need an equitable world where everyone is given what they need to reach equal outcomes. Finally, an ally is someone who walks alongside marginalized people while decentering themselves because it's not about them. So let's commence our allyship. Let's educate ourselves first with the works of people with disabilities, those with lived experiences. Let's listen to podcasts, read books, watch documentaries, and then engage in sincere conversations with the community. I've realized that accessibility might be a big word, and we immediately imagine a physical infrastructure like ramps and accessible parking spaces. But it is something that can be applied to simple day-to-day things that anyone here can execute. Take, for example, digital presentations, which are an integral part of our lives. By making our presentations more accessible, by having image descriptions, or having accessible font and color choices, we are not only creating an equitable virtual space for people with disabilities, but also for many others, like those with a different primary language, those with a different learning preference, and so on. And if we ever have the privilege to organize an event, design a space, or policies, let's bring in disability advocates or assemble a team of accessibility champions. Such initiatives must have people with disabilities in the front and center. Disability activists use the slogan, "Nothing about us without us," because it is them who know what they exactly need. Let's just be true allies, amplifying their voice, and not just creating safe, but safer spaces. And finally, let's treat ourselves with compassion. We are going to embark on a lifelong journey of learning, and as humans, we will make mistakes. I have done that as well. But that's not the end of our allyship. Instead of defending ourselves when we slip up, the best approach is to own our mistakes, learn from it, and make sure it does not happen again. I think it is time to accept that people aren't disabled. Our world is. Let's change that by adding accessibility to our vocabulary and reminding ourselves that providing accessibilities is within our abilities. Thank you.